Hello and welcome once again to Breakfast All Day. I am Christy, and that is Matt, and that's Alonso. We are all in our own respective places. We are all in our own individual biodomes right now to talk about Spaceship Earth. Now, do you guys remember when they were doing this? This is a documentary about all these people who went into this like biodome in the middle of the desert in 1991 to create their own utopia.
Yep.
Do you guys remember this in real life?
Yep.
I do remember it. Yeah, it's funny. I had to explain to somebody recently that biodome was a satire of a real thing, and they had no idea. And in fact, actually, I think if you watch this on the Alamo websites, they have an interview with Pauly Shore.
Why?
Because he was in biodome. Yeah. So this was a real thing, and it was called the Biosphere 2, and it was an ambitious attempt to basically prepare humanity for the possibility of creating colonies on the moon or on Mars or even here on an uninhabitable Earth. So it was meant to be a completely sort of self-sustained environment. It had an ocean, it had lakes, it had, there was agriculture, there was all this stuff, and these scientists in jumpsuits were going to live in there for 2 years and make it all work. And it didn't quite go the way it was necessarily expected to. But this is not a documentary about like a famous fiasco. It's about all the stuff that led up to this, because, the Biosphere 2 happened in the early 90s. But this was a group of people that really first got together in San Francisco in the late 1960s. Where else, when else? And it was a mix of like scientists and architects and theater artists and, whatever. And they made various different stabs at communal living. They built a geodesic dome in New Mexico and did farming out there. They built a boat and sailed it around the world, and not just sailed it around the world, but, they built a hotel in Kathmandu. They started an art gallery in London. So very, driven group of people, as Dave likes to say, hippies with a work ethic. And so eventually they come up with this idea to do the Biosphere 2. One of the Bass brothers from the oil company owning Bass Brothers in Fort Worth gets involved. And, the hype machine begins, and it becomes less about science and more about, fodder for television. And, what's fascinating about it is that almost all the people who participated in this thing are still alive, and they still work together. There's still this communal group of people doing stuff and creating things. And while they were doing everything they were doing before, they were documenting it. So they've got amazing footage of, building the geodesic dome and building the boat and all the stuff that happened in the decades that got them to the Spaceship Earth experiment. This movie is directed by Matt Wolf, who did a really great documentary about the avant-garde composer Arthur Russell called Wild Combination. And this is not a movie that is in any way sort of condescending about its subject matter. It sort of appreciates the fact that there was a moment, in our culture where we weren't just sort of like expecting our own demise, where we were sort of actively trying to create this new and exciting future that was going to be better for people and for the environment and everything else. Like I remember in the 70s, you would get the Weekly Reader would be about cities on the bottom of the sea or on the moon or whatever, and I think there's an element of that futurism of the past that barely exists anymore. Now it's just sort of like, when is it all going to fall apart, and how are we going to hasten that process? So I kind of like the optimism of this movie, even though it's about an experiment that didn't exactly go the way it was intended to.
Yeah, I like this movie too, but this is one of those documentaries that the subject matter is more interesting than I think the filmmaking. I wish the filmmaking was a little tighter and lived up to it, and the story it's telling. My takeaway from this is that this was a group that the Biosphere 2 was a project that was just the latest in a series of really ambitious projects that this group had put on. And it helps to get all of that background from them about how they basically designed and built their own ocean going ship and sailed around the world. And the whole time I was like, they're building, I'm like, these fuckers are never going to get this thing to float, right? But they did it, right? And so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of really fascinating stuff about that and their mindset. And even going into the Biosphere 2, the attitude that John Allen, their leader, has is like, you try something like this and you make mistakes and things go wrong, and then you fix them and you keep going, and then, things will go wrong, but a little bit less.
That's how science works.
And it's how science works. And one of the things I wish the movie had done a little bit better was show because they were business people, and Bass had been involved with them in various business ventures that they had done around the globe. Like he would finance them to like do the hotel and do the art gallery, and those seemed to be successful. This one, everything seemed fine until the decision gets made to bring in a PR firm to get national coverage. And at that point, that's when everything goes sideways, right? And I wish the movie had leaned into that some, because I can see how like, oh, okay, so now because they made a big deal about how like the CEO of the company is one of our group, and you know, the person who was doing publicity was one of our group, and you get with this professional publicity firm that comes in, you know, the promise starts to be like, these 8 people are going to be inside this biosphere for 2 years, and they only get what comes in with them, and nothing comes out. And it became, like they say in the movie, this game show. And I don't get the sense that going into that, anyone really, like, that's not quite what they had in mind. But we'll play that up to get the press.
They would have been more forgiving about things not going as planned if they hadn't sort of like sold it as this brilliant thing. Like if they had said, this is an experiment, we don't know what's going to happen, we're going to try this, and if that doesn't work.
Right. But that doesn't get the press, and because they want and that's, you know, and that's unfortunate, because if they had just stuck with like, well, we'll do local press, and because they weren't going after that level of press with anything else they had done previously.
Sure.
And part of it, it's like, yeah, you guys built a boat, who cares? You know, this is more ambitious, but you know, and then there's the visitor center and all that stuff. And, you know, and then the unexpected appearance of the villain of all villains, motherfucking Steve fucking Bannon.
Of course, wearing multiple shirts already.
Like, oh my God, who let this asshole into this movie?
So you mentioned that, you know, Matt Wolf has great appreciation for what they're doing, you know, and is not making fun of them or whatever. But I kind of almost feel like he's appreciative to the film's ultimate detriment, because there's all this allusion to how John Allen was involved with a couple of them, you know, who knows what that was about romantically, emotionally. There's a suggestion that it was a cult. And I feel like the film pulls its punches in terms of really delving into what the planning organization's relationship members relationships were like, but also within the biosphere, what's really happening in there. I mean, we see their physical deterioration as the film goes on, but like, I feel like there's a level of intimacy that is not afforded to us. Like there's a level of privacy that they're just, it's almost like they're too respectful. No, truly. And if this were happening today, or even like in the past 10, 20 years, there'd be a reality show about it. There'd be cameras all over that
Big
place.
Brother.
And you'd be able to, it is Big Brother. It's like high tech, you know, futuristic Big Brother. But I feel like that's what is missing here, is the promise of going deeper into who these people really are. I mean, they introduced all of the biosphere. I don't want to call them competitors. What are they?
The Paranauts.
The Biosphereans.
Yeah.
They call them the Biosphereans.
Right.
Oh,
and a couple of them are already coupled up. A couple of the men and women, they're all also super white. And, you know, and there's one.
They even talk about themselves as being diverse. I'm like, where?
Different shades
We're
of
a diverse
pasty.
group, and you see all these folks walk by and like,
That doesn't look like
one of them might have
yeah.
been a Latina or something. I don't know.
2 of them are blonde. Okay.
Yeah. It was,
there is a lot here that's fascinating in terms of their ideology and in terms of their ambition. And I wish it had delved deeper into who these people were as individuals, that they were willing to live life like this for a couple of years. It leaves you with a lot of lingering questions.
I will say a couple of great things, like the CFO and her wonderful 80s outfits. The one who talks about going for the run around, like there is some amazing 80s hair and shoulder pads.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Rue McClanahan.
yes. that was a surprise. She did not spend 2 years in the biosphere, however.
All of the you know, heavy duty, oh God, the gardeners are here. All of the heavy duty, you know, news people who were out there covering it, like it was a huge event. It's very strange. Yeah. I mean, again, it's fascinating, and there's a wealth of footage, and what they did The timing is so strange, though, too. Like watching a movie about people who are choosing to lock themselves inside for 2 years. To watch that now.
There is a little bit of like, listen, these clowns survived for 2 years. You'll deal.
But they
couldn't go to the grocery store.
Not to spoil things, though, but things don't all play out the way they intended.
Right.
There's some cheating. Anyway.
Find out more.
Gardeners are here, so it might be getting noisy for a sec. They're going to be in the backyard very soon. Can you guys hear that?
Tiny bit. It's fine. Right.
Eventually, they're going to be like right here. Anyway,
no, I think you guys make good points. They definitely there are aspects of it that they could have gone more deeply into. But I do think, this is one of those cases where the subject matter is so interesting that even if the filmmaking isn't always entirely up to snuff, what you get is still pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So what's your number?
I can't remember.
You said 7.5.
7.5. Thank you very much.
Matt, you said 7.
Thank you.
I'm also saying 7. So our number is a 7.2.
There you go. Like this video on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel here. Check us out on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at BeFastAllDay. And visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/BeFastAllDay. Catch up with our recaps of Hulu's Mrs. America and other fun stuff that's exclusive to our subscribers. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.